And as I kick off, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're coming to you today from. And I'm on beautiful Camaragal land. And I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and all the traditional custodians of the different lands from which we're joining our session on today. But before we get going, I'd firstly like to introduce to you all Kat Fay. And of course, many of you know Kat, who is the managing partner for Perpetual's community, ESG, and social investment business. And then I'd also like to call out some of our guest speakers who will be joining us later to give their commentary. Of course, Julie Riley, who is the CEO of Australians Investing in Women, and Toby Dawson, who is the partner and founder of Tomorrow Together. I'd firstly like to invite Kat Fay to give us some introductory remarks on this project before I go through our presentation.
Christy, thank you. And hi, everyone. Wonderful to see so many colleagues and friends on the line. It's great to be getting back together today to have this really important conversation around the Census 2021 data. I'd like to acknowledge that I am joining you today from Wurundjeri lands in the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. And as we're talking about the census, I think it's really important that we acknowledge that Census 2021 actually marked 50 years since Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander folk were included in the census, or data was collected on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander folks for the purpose of inclusion in the census rather than for the purpose of exclusion in census data. And that's really important for a lot of reasons, many of which we'll get into today in terms of the conversation that we have ahead of us, but really important to, I think, acknowledge that milestone as well. In terms of the Census 2021 report, numbers that matter, that we produced at Perpetual with our good friends and colleagues at Seer Data Analytics. I mean, one of the reasons it's really important, I think, to us to have those data available is because when we're working in the social purpose space, it's really critical that we are continually reflecting on what our communities look like and how they are actually framed as we try to make decisions around our social investments in support of those communities. And there's a number of things I think that it's really important to call out as social investment leaders when it comes to the census. Firstly, and really importantly, the census provides us with data. It doesn't necessarily provide us with insight. And Christy and I often talk about adding community voice to data is really the alchemy of turning data into insight. And that's a really important thing to remember as we start to talk about data. We're talking about data, we're not necessarily talking about insight. So the conversation today becomes really important in terms of adding your voices as community leaders to the data that we'll be discussing today. But you will notice within the report itself that we have included many community voices across many of the thematic topic areas that we discuss with regards to the census. And that is with a view to starting that conversation. But these are conversations that all of us need to be having in the organisations where we're working, to the boards that we engage with, the executive teams that we work on, as we set strategy around the mission of our organisation. How do we deliver on the mission of our organisation? It's really vital that we have some of the data and insight falling from that to underpin how we make decisions around the allocation of resources. And we know that government uses the census data, those census data, to make its decisions around policy, around allocation of funds, and all of that becomes really important. Of course it is, but as we look at the census data and we draw insight from those data, it's really important that we acknowledge and that we help governments and we help social purpose leaders who are working on really wicked problems we help them understand where some of the gaps might be around those data, and where there's opportunity to do more and to do better around the trends that we're seeing. So Census absolutely gives us an opportunity to understand where our impact is happening, how we're tracking against our own mission, whether or not our strategies need to pivot. And ultimately, it also helps us understand only every 4 years the scope of what our communities are looking like, and some of the trends that we're seeing within those communities. So a really important marker every 4 years in the diary. So the report in part is really to assist social purpose leaders like yourselves on the call to bring that conversation further in-house, to ensure that you're having it within your organisations, and to ensure that your board's also using this once in a 4-year period to reflect on its own strategy and how you're tracking against your mission. So really, really looking forward to the conversation today, Christy. Thanks for bringing us together, and thanks for helping us really solidify those data into what's going to be a really important conversation today.
Thank you, Kat, and thank you, everyone. Once again, please do drop your questions into the chat. Now, I'm going to kick off this afternoon with an introduction into what is available for you in these assets and in the report. And certainly we're going to drop into the chat how you can access the Census 21 Numbers That Matter report and all of the different assets that are available for you. There is a report that is a printed downloadable report, as well as a range of insights on the Seer platform, including an interactive dashboard, a suitcase, which is a folder of all of the insights that are in the report, but also supplementary insights. So it's a very, very rich data asset. I think it's more than 60 insights that you can duplicate and interrogate and create for your own purposes and decision-making. If you need any support accessing these assets or working out how to interrogate or make sense of that, please reach out to us. We're always happy to help so that you can get the most benefit from the analysis that we've done and made available for free on the Seer platform. So I'm going to start off by just highlighting to you that the report dives into 7 key themes. It is a very, very large data asset, of course. It is the largest data asset, as Kat said, that's available for public use in Australia. So we have worked through with Perpetual and with many of the partners in understanding what the data means and making sense of that in these 7 themes: population and prosperity. We deep dive into some of the First Nations insights, age in Australia, women and girls, health and disability and wellbeing, volunteering and mental health. So I'm going to only have time to go into 3 of these areas today, and really encourage you all to look at the report and deep dive into the assets. So I guess the first thing that I want to highlight as a snapshot for Australia is that, of course, our population has grown significantly since the last census. And we also are seeing, of course, the ageing population increase. The increases in our population are concentrated in metro areas, and certainly our retirement age population, that is people aged 65 and over, has grown by 65% to 2.6 million since 2016 to 4.3 million in 2021. So that obviously has really strong implications for our communities and for all of our work together in the not-for-profit sector and philanthropic sector. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in a moment and really understand what that means as we delve into the data. In addition to that, there is a large and vast income and gender pay gap. The number of households reporting total household income around above 4,000 per week has doubled in 2016 to more than 1.1 million households in Australia are reporting household income higher than 4,000 per week. In fact, men are significantly more represented in all personal weekly income brackets above 1,000 a week. So that's really something that we're going to talk about in a moment and reflect on with Julie Riley as well. This is, of course, no surprise to all of us as we feel this very deeply, and all of our not-for-profit partners are working closely with the people and organisations delivering services on the ground that, of course, increasing living costs are causing deep strain across our communities. In the 12 months since the 2021 census, all 5 household types reflected in the ABS living cost indexes have risen. So that means that cost of living is causing strain across all different household types, and aged pensioner households have the highest annual increase, with the rising cost of transport as the main contributor to some of that strain. When we look at relationships and how our communities, how people are organising themselves in households and in relationships, the number of people who've never married has increased to 43%. So really interesting and changing demographics in Australia. The number of people divorced has increased by 40% since the 2006 census, and the number of people in de facto relationships has increased by 75%. So really interesting time for, you know, the Australian demographics and how things are changing across all of our landscapes. So very quickly, in terms of our snapshot, some of the key themes or key highlights. So we wanted to point out to you, more than 1 in 10 Australians between the age of 15 and 54 reported suffering a long-term mental health condition. And it's the first time in the census that we've been able to report on mental health conditions. So this is, on one hand, you know, very important that this information is visible, because many of us working in health and mental health was difficult to get a real strong handle on the data that showed long-term mental health conditions. At the same time, quite a challenging environment for us as we've, of course, come through COVID and moving into, you know, managing multiple crises in many of our communities around Australia. More than 1 in 5 females between the age of 15 and 44 suffering from more than 1 or more long-term health conditions. And 1 in 8 baby boomers are providing childcare for other people's children, often grandchildren. So I just want to pause there, Kat. Did you have any reflections as you were looking at some of this data, particularly those highlighted pieces in the insights that came through? Any reflections that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, look, the mental health data was really great to be able to see it to the extent that we can now. But I mean, geez, Christy, there's a lot that's come out of it, particularly when we look at you know, the number of people reporting suffering with mental health condition, but also when you start to look at the ages as well. We're really seeing the impact that COVID has had, I think, in our communities. We're starting to hear that there's been bounce back in terms of how community is reporting feeling with relation to mental health. But you know, it makes for really stark reading, I think, and it's one of the big things to call out within the broader census report. How that's going to impact, I think, our education systems, how that impacts our workforce. As we go forward, you know, these things do not exist in vacuums. They're intertwined, they're intersectional, and they are the human experience. So that was probably one of the really significant things that I personally took away from the census. We'll have some really interesting conversations, obviously, with Toby later on today as well, just talking about our aging population and how we think about the intersectional natures of that aging population and our responsibilities, quite frankly, as a nation. to how we treat our senior communities and what it says about us when we don't.
Absolutely, thank you. And then, of course, you know, we did see in this 2021 census a significant increase of the population who identify as Aboriginal and/or Torres Strait Islander people. That increased by 25% from the last census to 812,000 people in Australia in this last census. Having said that, we also hear that that is likely also in many cases to be an undercount. And so we're very interested in your feedback as well for people who are here today, whether or not that aligns with your understanding because of the traditional nature of the undercount in Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander people. And then finally, of course, just to highlight, as many of us know, that despite advocacy and campaigning, LGBTQ communities were not reflected in relationship status in the census. And so we hope that moving forward that will change, yet the issues there is that, you know, those communities are not seen and reflected in those in the counts and in the data that's coming through. Pat, is there anything you'd like to touch on in regards to those 2 points?
Just to reiterate probably what you've already said, Christy, and in particular, you know, I think for the LGBTQIA plus communities in particular, you know, we know how important it is. You know, what gets measured actually ultimately has an impact on our communities. So we hope to see that addressed. Yeah, it's obviously really important that we continue to examine, particularly for those communities that have not been appropriately captured from a data perspective in the census, what their needs are. And we might need to do that by going directly to those communities and asking.
So let's move on into the cost of living. And this really is highlighted in the first chapter, the first theme in the census report, the population and prosperity. And this is around cost of living pressures. So we can see the significant increase, the pink line being 2021 census, the blue line being the 2016 census. And that for some of those communities, the costs of and mortgage monthly repayments have really significantly increased. And I think many people are feeling this. While we understand that, we also see that weekly income personal brackets by sex, men and women, the disparity between personal income brackets really has a deep gap or quite a large gap when we start looking at those higher income brackets in particular. And that has impact, of course, for many families, and in particular when we focus on women and girls. So we deep dive into women and girls, and Julie, I'm going to ask you to join us in a moment for the conversation and provide your reflections. But I'll just introduce this chapter. We had a really interesting look at the gender focus and the focus on women and girls in the census. So what's very interesting is that there were reported 6.3 million families that are single parent families. 4 out of 5 of those, the parent is the mother. The percentage of women who have completed year 12 or equivalent increased. So great story on, you know, women's education. And then, of course, females continue to report caring for their own and other children at higher numbers than men across all age ranges. And of course, you know, I'm interested in your thoughts on this, Julie, as you come in, the impact on those single parent families and those single mother the female-led families. And that women are caring for their children, certainly at higher rates than men. So I want to just pause. I'm going to stop the share and ask you, Julie Riley, if you're happy to jump in and share with us your reflections on the data. And thank you for your contribution to the report as well.
Thanks, Christy. And I think the first thing I want to say is congratulations to both Perpetual and Seer for the work that's done. And to let you know, I'm joining from Wurundjeri lands here and echo my respects. I'm glad to see it's finally the rain has stopped and a little bit of sunshine has come out. And I think there's a little bit of that in the women and girls space as well. And so I'd start by, apart from acknowledging the role that both Perpetual and Christy individually and as Seer have played in really bringing a focus to gender, and I thank you for that. I think we are in a pivotal moment, if I can say that, for women and girls. And what I hope this data and data analysis does is adds to what is a broader awakening at a sort of structural and government level of the need to put women at the centre. Christy, you just pointed out three actually of the big things that relate to women and girls. So one is the predominance of women in lower incomes in sole parenting roles. 80% of our sole parents are women, and I think that's really significant in terms of any sort of social justice work and social investment. But the other aspect of that is ageing, and we know that women continue to have a longer lifespan than men, and will be it's necessary to really think of that through a gender lens in terms of the way we plan for and respond to our ageing population. But the predominant issue still seems to be around parenting and childcare when it comes to this whole issue of how do we get equity for women, how do we make sure that that brilliant increase and strong education outcome for women, for girls, actually translates into better economic well-being for women. So we've got lots of good news in that we've seen at a state level and a federal level, government put more focus on women, and I'm sure this census data is helping to drive that, but it's actually been through a lot of advocacy by a lot of people, and particularly leading women, including our chair, Sam Mostyn, who I'm sure you see in the news almost every day. So there's good news about the focus, and I think the only good news I can think of that comes out of COVID is that it really did put a lens on the different experience that many women had of lockdowns, of home education, and I'd be very interested in people to put their comments in the chat, but it seems to me that a lot of the work we've been talking about for many years now seems to have just got a different traction, and this data will really help us in continuing that conversation. But I guess there's also some really concerning things about it. You can see the disproportionate load of domestic care that stays with women, of childcare, and the gender pay gap persists and in fact has widened. A lot of the metrics that we really felt quite positive about certainly in the corporate world are slipping backwards, and that always will have a flow-on effect in the community. So I'm happy to speak a bit more specifically, Christy, but I guess that the general comment I'd want to make is that there's good news in the focus. The statistics are still pretty alarming in terms of the need. And for me, it just absolutely emphasises that the gender lens work that I know Perpetual puts into their grant applications and analysis, I really hope and implore other people to take up. I'm really struck by that 20% of women having a long-term health issue too. I think we know that there's a lot of inbuilt gender bias in the health system historically, and in a lot of the treatments and interventions, health interventions. And so again, you know, a lot of people on this call are funding or working in the area of medical research, and I would say that's a critical area for a gender lens. and I can continue later, but I also I really want to echo the disappointment that this data does not allow us to look at gender diverse people and LGBTIQ communities more broadly. And I can only hope that the next census that will be built in.
Thank you, Julie. Really important and sobering comments, I think. Julie, what are you seeing? What actions are you seeing either the philanthropic community or others, governments taking? I mean, we've seen some commitments from the federal government in the last budget. What actions are being taken and what should we be doing?
So I think one of the both the most distressing issues and one of the areas where I am seeing some stronger focus on women is in housing. Some of you will have been part of a research launch that we did about 3 weeks ago that per capita did an analysis really of, we've seen a lot of work on the lack of affordable housing and the flow and effects of that. And we commissioned Per Capita to do a study that basically said, okay, let's look at that data, but actually look at it specifically for women and what that means. So sometimes, Christy, I think it's a little bit like, you know, having a red Volkswagen. Once you've got one, you see them everywhere. I just do see an extraordinary focus on housing at the moment. I think, you know, there's a broad acknowledgement that we can't resolve many of the issues of inequity, whether it's income, childcare, a whole range of things, if we don't have stable housing. And both what's come out in the budget, but also what I'm seeing really discussed in the social sector is a much stronger focus on how we look at innovation and different models of housing for women. And certainly a lot of philanthropy, and I'll call out Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation as being leading in some of the innovative work that they're looking at around that. So I hope I'm not seeing that through rose-coloured glasses, Christy, but I really do think that the smart money is on looking at women and girls and gender, both in an analysis and in as part of the solution to some of these broader problems. And it's not just housing. There's an awful lot of work going into that Sam Mostyn is leading around women's economic security and employment. Tomorrow, we're part of some research that's being launched by Deloitte, and Kat's been on that, and some others on this call have been on the research reference committee for that. And I guess in terms of this data, what the research looks at is the economic cost of gender norms. And you can certainly tune in virtually tomorrow to see it. But I think it's a response to the fact that we've seen so many efforts and strategies to increase women's leadership, to increase or to decrease the gender pay gap. Over a couple of decades, we've seen a lot of work that doesn't seem to be getting the traction we want it to have. It's certainly improved in lots of areas. And this research is really about saying, well, what's underneath that? What's the resistance here? And really finding that there's a lot that indicates, a lot of evidence would say it's actually about our attitudes and mindsets and beliefs about what women should do and what men should do. And obviously in there some recognition that gender as a broad area is very much now inclusive of diverse gender identities. So this research is really saying if we want to shift the dial on gender equity, we really need to shift the expectation around gender norms, and it puts a figure on it that will be released tomorrow.
Fascinating. Thanks, Julie. Thank you so much for all of your work and contribution. Kat, before I move into the next section, Kat Faye, is there anything that you're thinking about as Julie's speaking to those important elements? Oh,
Not sure if Kat's there. I'm just, Christy, thanks. I'm just reading the comments actually.
Thank you. Yeah. So while I'm there, I'll just highlight to everybody that when you do access on Seer the data assets, you'll see as well, in addition to the data that is available through the census and the analysis that we've done in the women and girls section in the suitcases, you also see a range of data assets that we've included around housing and homelessness services. So you can get a more complete picture and then you can analyze that for your own work. So a very rich data asset there on the issues related to women and girls and housing and homelessness. Thank you so much, Julie. Kat, I see that you're back on. Is there anything you wanted to add at all before I go on to the next section?
Christy, can you hear me?
Yeah, only just now.
Yeah, I can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, I just all I was going to sort of add really to what Julie was saying, and we'll have a report released shortly around our IPAP data, which really is an aggregator for philanthropic investment more broadly across the sector. What we are seeing is that applications from not-for-profit organisations that are prioritising women and girls are almost succeeding at a higher rate to other applications, but we're not seeing as many of them. So if we want to see more philanthropic investment in women and girls, we really need organisations who are at the coalface of the community sector to look at their own prioritisation of programs that are aimed at women and girls as well.
Thanks, Kat. If I can just jump in quickly and say, I really appreciate you saying that, because philanthropy is obviously only one side of the picture, but it's also putting a gender lens, is encouraging the not-for-profits to really adapt and refine their programs so that they are applying a gender lens too. So thank you.
Thanks, Julie, and really appreciate that. I'm going to jump into the next section now, which is about ageing and Australia's ageing population. There is a great deal of information in the report and again on the suitcases on here that highlight the issues and, you know, really, I suppose, some of the key things that I want to point out, and I'll ask Toby to jump in a moment and give your reflections. That life expectancy has increased by sex. So men and women are living longer, of course. Long-term health conditions by age and condition. More than 1 in 5 Australians over the age of 65 reported suffering 2 or more long-term health conditions. And then what we're looking here at is, you know, the extent of those conditions and the gender differences, you know, between the sexes, the female and male differences on those conditions, and the increased need for assistance for males and females aged 85 years and over has increased significantly. So I'll just pause and I'll ask Toby if you would be happy to join us, Toby, and give your reflections. And of course, thank you again for contributing to the report.
My pleasure, and thank you very much for having me along today, Christy and Kat, and everyone for joining what I think is a fantastic opportunity to dive in below the numbers. And hello from Dharawal country, which is on the beautiful south coast of New South Wales. Look, we all age and we'll all get old if we're lucky enough. But the problem that's presenting, that we're seeing, is the way that services are designed, systems are designed, organisations are delivering services around ageing, are struggling to keep up with the pace in which our population is ageing. The challenge that we're seeing with this rapidly increasing population of older people is that they are facing the wicked problems. So the wicked problems, in case you're not aware of that term, they're the really challenging big ticket items. And, you know, Julie just ran through quite a few that are attached to women and girls. but we're also seeing the housing impacts on the older population. We're also seeing the impacts of health conditions, chronic health conditions, mental illness on the aging population. And, you know, the grumpy old man analogy that we've all become accustomed to and know quite well, we're actually now starting to understand that that's actually an isolated, lonely man who's probably got a level of depression. Now, if we use this analogy and we extend that out, if he's lonely and isolated, there's a chance that the services that are available for him, he's going to have significant equity of access barriers in being able to navigate what are quite complex service environments. So we also know that there's a high chance that the cost of living increases. They're going to put impacts on his housing availability or access, which is then going to put further impacts into the ability to, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, to be able to socially participate and connect with that community. And I think what we've all got, everyone in this webinar today, got out of bed this morning with a purpose, a sense of direction to go and achieve something. And when we put our head on our pillow this evening, we'll all have a sense of accomplishment and achievement. Unfortunately, what we're seeing in the aging population is people aren't having that purpose, that connection, and then that achievement at the end of the day. It's eroding their independence. And this is where I think we really need to think quite laterally across philanthropy, across service design, across the way that governments are setting system environments up, in how we start to make these different sectors interconnect to make the experience for that older man or older woman as they navigate these challenges. What we need to do is to start thinking about how we can create a system agnostic environment. So we're all funded from different vehicles, whether it's a government funding bucket, whether it's grant funding from philanthropy, whether it's consumers. But within each of those investment paradigms, there's limits and restrictions on what we can or can't do. Unfortunately, what that in turn does is it puts limits and restrictions on how we design the services that people participate in, sorry. So the analogy of the duck swimming across the water, nice and calm on the surface, the legs are going like Billy-O. Unfortunately for older people in a service environment, that duck's upside down. Organisations, governments, service providers are cruising along in their swim lane, and older people are having to, you know, they're the legs going like Billy-O. They're having to navigate extremely complex service environments because you've got to navigate your financial environment, whether that's superannuation, whether that's pension, whether it's balancing how much work you can undertake to make sure that you're not impacting those financial situations. You've got increasingly complex health conditions. You know, we've seen this spike in dementia as a cause of death in Australia. That 15, 20 years ago wasn't so, but it is a reflection of the way that aging Australia is increasing. We also know that cognitive decline in its own is increasing as people age. So we need to start thinking about how can people who are having their ability to participate eroded with age, how can we make it easier for them to navigate these environments? The NDIS, for example, if you are 64 and 364 days old, you can apply for NDIS funding. The moment you are 65, you are no longer eligible for disability support. You are now part of the aged care sector. You know, Medicare support and what that funds versus private health. All of these systems that are in place to support older people actually put up significant barriers for people to be able to participate, have control over their future and their destiny, and maintain independence. And I think if you strip all of that back, the loss of independence is one of the most crippling things for people as they age. I'll throw to you, Christy. I could keep going on for this, but if there's any reflections or questions that you have.
Thanks, Toby. A massive complexity for people to navigate and families more broadly. What actions, again, are you seeing need to be taken or are being taken by either philanthropic or not-for-profit organisations to deal with and address these issues?
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing we are hearing a lot more around is being customer-centric. People talk about customer-centric, but I think We need to get beyond talking about it, and we need to understand it and implement it. Because linking back into what Julie was just discussing around women and girls, we've got this sandwich generation, and the sandwich generation are termed that because they're sandwiched between caring responsibilities. They're caring for aging parents, they're caring for children. The carer in that situation, we tend to leave the gender out, but quite often it is women who are overrepresented in those caring roles, whilst also trying to maintain and balance households and work and careers. Now, what we need to start looking at from that service design delivery perspective is, how do we put the customer truly in the middle of all of our design, all of our policy making decisions, all of our service delivery, so that as people are aging, they are supported to maintain that independence. We're starting to see the removal of the gated, ring-fenced aging community, and people being supported to age in place within their community, so that they can maintain that connection, that participation. But there's still a lot of work to do. There's significant reform going through the aged care sector off the back of the Royal Commission into aged care quality and safety. But we need to realise that aged care isn't the panacea for our ageing population. Just like we need to be bringing women and girls to the fore in our decision making, we need to start thinking about how can we make more inclusive and participatory environments for older people. Because what you look at when you make you remove those equity of access barriers and people are able to participate, you can take a really positive approach, because it creates those opportunities to participate right across the spectrum. Age-friendly environments tend to also be disability-friendly environments, also tend to be quite family-friendly and young person-friendly environments. So if we start to think laterally, put the funding guidelines to a side, and I know the Perpetual team, I'm not going to put you too much hot water here with your fantastic impact grants program, which I know is out, but put the guidelines to a side for a minute and start to think laterally around, how will this impact older people? Will it impact them positively or negatively? And do that social impact assessment up front, so that you can start to understand what the trade-offs are around delivering that service, to make sure that we truly are putting that customer in the middle, which is the older person, and we are being inclusive, ensuring they can participate and maintain that independence.
Thanks, Toby. Really fantastic contribution to highlight what the numbers are telling us at a top line level, but what that really means for people living, working, delivering services, working together in collaboration on the ground in our communities all over Australia. Thank you. Kat, Faye, I know that you dropped out a moment ago, but I would like to give you the opportunity to have a quick reflection on perhaps the aging in Australia part of the report.
I'm going to try and do this via my phone for audio, Christy, so hopefully that's working and you can hear me fine. But look, how great was that sort of that commentary from Toby? I think really, talking about aged care not being the panacea, I think that's a really important point for us to reflect on. And those of us that are involved in philanthropy, know that in a world where we're talking about social return on investments, a lot of the thinking starts with young people and how we maximise our social return on investments by getting in with young people early, breaking systems of disadvantage, making sure they're accessing the education system and so forth. And ultimately, we see an impact down the line. So in some ways, investing in, how do we build a society that allows people to thrive as they age, isn't necessarily fitting the social return on investment kind of approach in terms of investing in individuals as they age into their seniority. So it's, I think it's something that I think philanthropy really needs to stare into, given all of the intersectional points that Toby has called out, and the fact that I think a lot of what we need to reflect on as a society is really about what type of nation we have can be reflected on in terms of the type of community our elders have to retire into and age into. So, you know, they're important reflection points. And I think philanthropy in particular needs to do much better with regards to how it considers its appropriate investment points into an ageing nation.
Thank you, Kat. Absolutely agree. I am going to just actually launch a poll right now for everybody who is with us. And I'd invite you to contribute to the poll as we go through. And I'll just drop into the chat as well how you can access the report. Now, Pat Baker, I'm not seeing the polls being, I'm not actually able to launch the polls right now.
No problem, I can do it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Right, so if you don't mind, everyone, you can see the question here. What are you most interested in deep diving into? What would you like to know more about? Are you interested in specific themes in the section of the report around, and you can see there's 7 different areas. I'm going to, you know, invite you to answer that. And in a moment, I'm going to touch on one other area very briefly before we go into the assets. And I'm also going to invite our Chief Data Scientist, Adam Peaston, who, together with our analyst team, our data analyst team who are here today, who did a lot of the analysis when we were looking at all of the census data and what might be of most interest. And so I can see here that there, you know, mental health is an important area of focus for many of the people here on the webinar, as well as, thank you, Nadia, volunteering. So why don't I end this poll right now and share the results? And clearly, yeah, we have a great interest in health, disability, well-being, and mental health. So once again, as I said earlier, you know, one of the important contributions that we hadn't seen in the census previously was the question around long-term mental health conditions. And, you know, really encourage you to deep dive into this material. But what is, of course, concerning is that long-term mental health conditions are more prevalent in regional Australia, and more than 1 in 10 Australians between the age of 15 and 54 reported suffering a long-term mental health condition, including depression or anxiety. And if you do dive into the assets on Seer, you'll be able to see more deeply the regional splits and look at that information and data as it relates to, you know, geographic areas around Australia. And we have already spoken about the fact that 1 in 5 females between the age of 15 and 44 report suffering from long-term health conditions. Before I invite Adam to give his comment on the assets and what he was surprised by, I'll just let you know, I dropped into the chat the link to access all of these assets. And then I'll let you know that when you jump into Seer, you'll be able to see a number of different things. So first of all, you'll be able to see, and I'm sharing right now as I navigate, the census report, Numbers That Matter report. And this is all organized so that you can access the dashboard, which is an interactive dashboard. And you can also, which I've just jumped in on here, and you can access a range of insights and download the report from here as well. You can also access the information that is on Seer more broadly, including a number of different insights and data assets that help give greater information. And as I said earlier, if you go into the suitcase for women and girls, for example, you'll notice that we have the census data in here. In addition to that, a number of different insights that relate to homelessness services and others. Number of I think more than 60 insights that you can duplicate, replicate, and then, explore that data at a local level as well. So Adam, if I could ask you to come onto the screen right now, I know that you had some, interesting insights through doing the analysis. Is there something that you'd like to share with us as well?
Yeah, thanks, Christy. And apologies, everybody. I'm not going to be able to share my screen. I found myself actually a little bit homeless myself this afternoon. So apologies for that. Can you hear me all right? Everybody, great. Yeah, so it's always a bit of a there's always a tension, I think, as a sort of a data practitioner when I'm asked to opine, if you like, on data that we see. We much prefer as data scientists to sort of just simply report the statistics just exactly as they are. But you can't help but to sort of hear and feel the human stories that are resonant in a lot of the data that we were pouring through as we were producing this report. And I'll just echo the call to action to jump in and have a look at some of the insights behind a lot of that data. Yeah, a couple of things that really stood out for me. I mean, I was fascinated by the new data that was available in this most recent census about long-term health conditions, and particularly where that was able to shine a really strong light on mental health. What we found was that mental health is the most prevalent long-term health condition, I should say, of any kind, that's reported by folks under the age of 50. And in fact, everybody would seem under the age of 50 is reporting a long-term mental health condition at a rate of about 1 in 10, which was just a huge shock for me. I mean, it's been clear to me for some time, anecdotally, that this is a huge issue, and there were some statistics, but having been in conversation with many folks actually working in the sector, focused specifically on mental health, there had been a bit of a vacuum of hard information about the rates and prevalences of mental health as an issue, and so that was it's terrific that it's available to us now, but it is very much a call to action. And one other interesting feature, I should say, of the data that we were looking at was rates of what are called core activity need for assistance. So where people have a need for assistance from others to do everyday tasks like put in their clothing, feed and maintain their homes and themselves. That's considered to be a core activity need for assistance. What I've noticed, I suppose, is that there appears to be like rising rates of core activity need for assistance amongst very young people in the age range of 5 to 14. You'll find the insight that relates to this in particular in the health and disability section of the insights on the Seer platform, if you make your way in there. I was really surprised to see that in that particular age range is exhibiting that rise in a core activity need for assistance. And for me, it was just a great big question mark. I would absolutely love to know what it is that's driving that. What kind of structural element is that? If it's something that we need to think as a society about how we can arrest that acceleration, then that would seem to be something that would need attention pretty soon. With that, I'll yield.
Thanks, Adam. And I did, while you were speaking, I did highlight for people that insight that you spoke about that stood out to you. And so just to reinforce to everyone, please, we invite you to access all of these assets, read the report, and also as Lindsay Dawson has kindly dropped in as well, she's included a number of different, a link to Perpetual's Australian Philanthropy Insights report. And in addition to that, a number of other resources will be available to you after today. So finally, as we wrap up, I'd invite any questions, please. And as we're doing that, perhaps, Pat, and we're waiting for some questions from people to come in, I would like to ask, do we have another poll, Kat, at all, or are we good? I think that we did the earlier poll as well. So as I wrap up today, it's almost to time. I'd invite Kat Fay to please jump in again as we finalise our conversation today with some final remarks.
Thanks, Christine. I think I'm being chucked in and out of of the conversation now. I'm not sure whether or not that's because I don't have anything good to say. But look, I just want to sort of take this opportunity to thank our guests, in particular Julie and Toby, not just for sharing their time today, but for sharing their insights also within the report. I'd also like to acknowledge the many other contributors to the Census 2021 Numbers That Matter report for contributing and lending their voices, but reiterate that this report is really about taking back to your organisations, sharing across your organisations, and in particular with your exec teams and your board to ensure that you're spending the precious resources that you have within your for-purpose organisation on the things that matter to you and to your mission. And thanks as well to everybody who has contributed to the conversation today and has shared resources and their expertise in a number of areas across the particular data points. A reminder, I think, and a really important reminder that we are not data sets, we are human beings. And our experiences are varied and many, and it's really important that the representatives on the line today continue to contribute to our broad and vast stories. So thank you, Christy, to your team, and to everybody for participating today.
Thank you, Kat, and thank you again. I really appreciate your time, everyone, and look forward to continuing our conversation together. Thank you.
Christy, can I ask you, while people are finishing up, just, when we do have a chance to, either through government bodies or to our local members, what are the bits that you find are really missing when you're doing that rich mining of ABS data?
Oh, well, I think what's evident as we look at the census, and we can see some of the gaps exist. A lot of the time, it's great to see some of our colleagues from all over Australia on the line here as well. What we also see is how that data is collected is incredibly important to represent communities such as First Nations communities. And I think the ABS is always looking at ways of ensuring that data is collected in such a way that truly represents our communities. I can see, and always thinking about, different models for collection to truly represent our communities and ensure the count, because as we all know, in regional and remote communities, having access to being able to contribute to the census through digital means or even through paper contributions is not always accessible. And that, go ahead, Julie.
Sorry, Christy, I was just remembering that both some work that Equity Economics has done for us per capita, and the work that Anne Summers did with Paul Ramsey Foundation on domestic violence, there was a real concern that a lot of the government data just didn't have a breakdown for First Nations women. So I wondered if you've seen that as a big gap as well.
Well, it is very much a big gap, and I can, there are fantastic initiatives happening on the ground in places where, for example, First Nations led initiatives are designing their own census that can contribute hopefully to, the ABS construct. And that would be, and those have already been designed. And I mean, it's not for me to speak to yet. That type of work is underway. And I think that will enrich how we think about the census moving forward in the next number of years.
Great. I've just got a link back for that Deloitte research report tomorrow that works for virtual, I think. So I might send it to you and Catherine, and perhaps if there's a follow-up. I don't know if you're doing a follow-up today, but it's not till late tomorrow afternoon, so it might be worth.
Terrific. Yeah, thank you.
I just don't know if they'll keep it open tomorrow. But
Julie,
anyway,
is the session accessible online, is it, tomorrow afternoon?
Yeah, it is.